very much. Yes, definitely. Well, it's my pleasure. Mary, welcome again for our lecture. Today we will be together with like a more or less 40 people. This is the second week of lecture sessions, and we will be with you today. It's more or less 1 hour or 10 minus and plus. And after your lecture, we will have a question and answer. All our participants will be listening to you very patiently and will be very interestingly. So please, you have access to share your slides, and
okay.
So we are recording the sessions for the further consultation of participants if there is any questions, etc. I hope it's okay for you as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
And we will also request the PowerPoint presentation for further documentation.
Okay, no problem. I expected.
Maybe
okay.
if you
can everybody
yourself would be very nice too, if you can. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here and share with you some experience that I have on this topic. My name is Mary Alcantara. I'm an American-Hungarian. I was born and raised in California, but have been living in Budapest, Hungary for the last 10 years. This is where I am calling to you from now. And I'm excited to, go through this topic together. Thank you for the invitation. And I would love to get to know a little bit more about all of you and your work and the startups and entrepreneurship ideas that you're exploring as well. So I am serving right now as Accelerator-in-Residence as an advisor to a Hungarian government program called Input. Our mission is to help Hungarian businesses and innovation companies expand to international markets. So before COVID, I was kind of dividing my time between Hungary and the US, helping Hungarian companies make connections and expansion plans into the US and Canada and North American markets. So a lot of what I'm talking about here is my favorite tools and theories that I apply to the companies that I work with on a daily basis. And I'm happy to have this be an interactive session. So if you have any questions at any time, just write it into the chat and I'll try to check them as I go along. I have 4 main topics that I'd like to go through with you today. The first is just kind of an intro about different types of business models. So our topic today is business models, business development models and processes. And I think we need to understand what is a business model, what are the different types of business models, and I'm going to show you lots and lots of examples to get your minds thinking about this. And then I want to go into a tool that I really like called the Business Model Kit that was developed by the Board of Innovation. I know that you're going to have a session in a few weeks' time about the Business Model Canvas, which is also a great tool. And this is kind of a precursor that gives you some of the building blocks and lets you explore. And I have a link to that, to the full tool, so you can explore that more in your own time. Then I'm going to talk about the relationship between the business model and business development. So once you have an idea about what's the value that you're creating for which target customers in which segments, how do you package that? How do you communicate that? And what are the best sales tools and tactics to actually deliver that value? And it's actually not as intuitive as you might think. And then lastly, I'm going to close with a really specific tool that I think is really at the heart of any business development process. And this is the idea of customer development. And we'll talk about how do you do that? How do you talk to your customers to actually learn about them and create sales? Okay, so these examples, actually, there's a really nice article that outlines all of this. So I linked to that here. So when you get the slides, you can go ahead and visit that article if you want to read through all the details yourself. I really liked this because it shows 12 really common business models, but from the perspective, all looking at coffee. So coffee is something we all understand. Turkish coffee is especially delicious. So I'm sure that you can get behind this as an example here. So I'm going to go through the 12 kind of typical business models, explain them a little bit in detail, and then show you the example if you're looking just at coffee, all the different ways that you can sell or create value around coffee. So the first business model we're going to talk about is the subscription model. This is probably the most standard. Everybody's familiar with this. Basically, you give a monthly fee. It's a monthly subscription model where you exchange some money for a service or a product. So Netflix is a very typical example of this. You pay a fixed amount every month and you get access to their whole platform and you can watch as many shows as you want. yeah, in the coffee use case, it's basically you sign up, you get one bag of ground coffee for a week for a monthly fee. So there's different subscriptions that can be either services, software as a service, or products, some subscription boxes. This is a very popular new kind of model as well, where you get, you know, a set of products once a month. The second model that I think we all know about is the bundling model. So this is the idea that you're creating, you're getting a better deal if you buy a package of products at the same time. Fast food chains do this very well. So Burger King, McDonald's, rather than buying, you know, a hamburger and fries and a drink all separately for a little bit more, they make you a meal deal that's a bundle, and that helps you, you know, you spend more money because you're ending up getting more, it's perceived as more value for those products together. So for the coffee use case, you have a coffee, a scone, and a bagel or a cookie that, you know, for a little bit better deal than just buying the coffee on its own. Freemium model. This is really similar to the subscription model, except there's a different tier. So there's a certain amount of free services that you get before you have to pay more to be able to get additional. Spotify is a very common example for this one. You're able to listen to music for free as much as you want, but if you want to listen uninterrupted with no ads, you have to pay a premium price. There can be multiple tiers with the freemium model, so it doesn't necessarily have to just be, you know, paying to get rid of ads. That's the only option. You can have a free service like HubSpot or MailChimp. Some of these services offer some amount of their features for free. And then there's tiered pricing depending on how many extra kind of instances you want to take up of that. So yeah, in the coffee, going back to the coffee example, a freemium version would be you get a free cup of coffee once a week. And if you want any more after that, you have to pay. The fourth business model that we're looking at is called the razor blades model. And this was made popular by razor blades. So traditionally, razor blades were sold for very cheap. The handles were very cheap, and the expensive piece was the actual razor blade itself. So people would buy a razor blade package for a great deal, and then pay you know, the expensive price for the razor blades every time that they had to get a new razor. This is, for the coffee example, this is kind of like coffee pods. So you buy the machine, that's pretty, you know, a good value. And then you're paying a fixed price for every one of those coffee pods that you get. And you have to keep buying those on a weekly basis. It's still maybe a better deal than going to the, you know, coffee shop every time, but it's still kind of a premium product compared to just getting your own bag of ground coffee and brewing that in a traditional machine. The Dollar Shave Club here is listed as an example in the razor blade model, but they're especially innovative and interesting because they kind of flipped even that model on its head, where instead of selling you the expensive razors, they just say, okay, you're going to spend this much per year on razor blades. We're going to put it out into a monthly package. It's $1 every time. And they make sure that you always have a fresh razor blade whenever you need it. So I really like them as an example. They have also really great marketing campaigns. If you haven't seen those, you can just Google the Dollar Shave Club YouTube, and they have a really nice marketing package. Okay, one other thing about the razor blades model, Apple also does this. You can think about Apple because they sell, this is kind of a reverse actually razor blade model, where they sell the expensive item by marketing to all of the really cool perks and free things that you get on it. So an example that I fell for or worked for me, I was really excited. I got a new iPad recently, not because I was super pumped about the iPad itself, although I really enjoy using it, but because I really wanted to use the Procreate app, which is a really powerful app that's very affordable for its price, and it's only, you know, it only works in the with Apple products. So Apple does a great job of kind of the reverse razor blade by marketing all the bundled stuff that you get with it and then selling you the premium product. The fifth business model is the product to service model. And this is basically selling the result without actually selling the thing itself. So an example, you know, let's say you own a company that makes scooters and you need to have two pieces of metal welded together. You can either buy the metal welding machine to do it yourself, or you can hire a company that does this for you to weld it for you. The end result is the same. You get a welded scooter, but in one case, you're buying the product yourself. And the second case, you're buying a service of somebody doing that for you. So that's kind of the typical product to service model. You know, rather than getting a lot of equipment, machinery companies work in this way by selling use of their machine or selling, you know, a service of, you know, spending time with that equipment. In the coffee use case, this is hiring a barista to make you and your friends coffee for a specific amount of time. So you're basically hiring somebody's time and their equipment to do that. Uber is an example of this. So you're not actually, you know, buying a taxi or a car to paying to get there, but you're actually using somebody else's, you know, equipment to get yourself, you know, to your end destination. So again, yeah, this is actually delivering the result rather than the actual equipment and everything that you need to get that result done yourself. Leasing model, this is pretty straightforward. This is a very traditional business model. Rather than selling the equipment, you can lease it to somebody for a period of time. So in the coffee example, this would be renting an espresso machine for the weekend so that you can make fancy lattes for your friends. Maybe you're having a party and you want to be able to serve lots of nice coffee, but you don't need to have that expensive machine with you all the time or that much capacity. So you just rent it out for the weekend. Typical leasing model companies that you might encounter are kind of rental car companies. That's a very typical model. Anytime that you would rent a piece of equipment or rent a service instead of buying the whole thing, including all the costs and maintenance for that, that's a typical example of a leasing model. Seventh one is the crowdsourcing model. And I think this is a really interesting one that's really been made possible and enabled by the internet. This is basically exchanging ideas and opinions from the crowd for services. So for the coffee use case, an example here would be giving your coffee roaster 5 ideas for new drinks that they could do with their coffee in exchange for free coffee. So this is kind of when people you know, sell their ideas or, you know, help come up with new topics or actually populate something. The examples here are Wikipedia, so that's something that's crowdsourced by the entire world, or even Indiegogo, like a crowdfunding campaign platform like Kickstarter. I think another really interesting one, though, is Duolingo. Who's familiar with Duolingo? If you are, just put it in the chat that you know it or you like it. Anyhow, Duolingo has a really interesting model because they actually crowdsource what they're doing is they're teaching people how to learn a language. But the way they're doing that is they're slowly translating. They're using people's inputs as they learn a language to actually translate different pieces of the internet. It's a really cool concept how they do it. So they're delivering a service, but they're also crowdsourcing a translation at the same time. Okay, sorry, you may hear my kids in the background too. They just woke up from their naps. Okay, the seventh model that we are looking at is the one-for-one model. And this is basically, it's kind of a promotional tactic. So for every product that somebody purchases, you donate or contribute some piece of that product to charity, to a charitable organization. So Tom's shoes are a really popular model that uses the one-for-one model in the US. In the coffee example, this would be, you know, every time you buy a cup of coffee, a free cup of coffee is donated to somebody across the world or somebody in a location where they aren't able to get coffee. Tom's shoes, you know, became really successful. Their shoes are not too expensive to make, but they became very trendy and popular. And they built that into the pricing model that every time somebody would buy a pair of shoes, they would donate a pair of shoes to somebody less fortunate. Okay, the ninth model is the franchise model. And this is probably most people are familiar with it. We see and visit franchise businesses every day in our lives. So it basically is an established business blueprint that is purchased and reproduced by somebody else. So if you buy a franchise, you get a whole plan of how exactly to run it, kind of a playbook, you know, what you need to do. It can include, as you know, lots of details like the business plan, you know, marketing, even text for social media posts. You know, there's lots of different things that can work like that in a franchising model. And in exchange, the franchisee pays a licensing fee and possibly a percentage of the profits. So there's different kind of ways that you can even set that up. Starbucks is probably one of the most famous franchises, and that's exactly a coffee shop example. So everybody, I think, is familiar with Starbucks. A lot of fast food chains work this way as well, but it doesn't necessarily have to just be in food or beverage. So you can think about franchising a community. There's a lot of different club organizations that have a local chapter, or creating, a new kind of division that has the same kind of blueprint for how you run and build that community. Okay, the distribution model, this is number 10. This is basically, rather than being the one that interacts directly with the consumers, you're a little bit step further back in the value chain, where you're actually producing something yourself and giving it to the people who might, give it to the end customers. So this is basically, if you're looking at a supply chain, there's many different players. This is stepping back from the end, consumer facing, and you're looking at the distribution. Maybe you're not the producers yourselves, you're just somebody in the middle, but there's different, pieces of the value chain that you can just carve out and create a separate business model around that. So a supplier, distributor, end consumer, those are kind of, that's like the smallest maybe sales chain that you might have. And even within that, there can be many, many steps, 10, 15 sometimes in certain industries. And there's different kind of value propositions that you can develop throughout a distribution chain. Okay, number 11, the manufacturer model. So this is, what it sounds like. You're the one that's actually making the product, usually in a big factory, doing it at a mass scale, producing, converting raw materials into a product. So companies like Dell Computers or Hewlett Packard are also manufacturers. So they make their computers with parts that might be put together by other companies, but they're actually producing those the end product themselves. Intel, obviously, they produce the microchips that are powering lots of our computers. So you can be a manufacturer if you're creating, the components in a product, or you're assembling many components and putting them together in one product. These also both count as manufacturing. This is typically for, a very physical product. So this is a very physical, hands-on, rather than developing a piece of software with code, there's some kind of a hard, tangible component when you have a manufacturing model. Okay, and the last business model that we're going to look at for this section is the retailer model. And this is basically kind of going back to the idea of the supply chain. Rather than a distributor, this is the retailer. So this is somebody that gets the product from different brands or different sources and sells them and markets them directly to the consumers. You can also, so there's, closed stores, those are kind of the typical brick and mortar retailers. This is also, you can think about this as kind of a commission model as well. So, anybody that represents a company and helps them get customers, typical salespeople kind of work in a retailer model where they represent those brands, those customers, and they help get them new customers. And sorry about that. And then they get a commission from that. Okay, so before we move into the next section, sorry, I'm just trying to find the chat here for a second. I don't know if there's been any chats up until this point. I don't think so. If anybody has any questions, just feel free to write it in the chat and I will try to keep an eye on that as we go. Okay, I found the chat button here. Okay, so that was the first section. That's hopefully giving you some idea about what kind of business models are out there, what you can do. There's different pieces of the supply chain to think about. There's different, parts that you can monetize or ask for depending on what it is you're trying to do. I think, probably most people who are thinking about starting a startup today, it's more in the software space, but don't forget about these traditional ways that you can package and deliver what you're doing. Okay, so now we're going to look at a certain tool that's from the Board of Innovation. I put the link here in the slides, so you'll get this after the presentation. And this is called the Business Model Kit, the Business Model Blocks template. So it's part of their Business Model Kit. And this helps you really kind of dive in and experiment and play around with building your own business model. As I mentioned, you guys are going to have a course on the Business Model Canvas. If you're not familiar with that as a tool, it's really super useful, but it's kind of a static document with 9 different blocks. This is something that kind of, you can play around with and think and brainstorm and have kind of your own development based on that. So I just wanted to show you a couple, slides from this. So these are all the different building blocks. So over here on the left side is basically the different things that you might exchange with the different stakeholders in your business model ecosystem. The stakeholders are over here in the pink. So the black is your organization. The pink are all the different stakeholders and different players you might interact with as you create a business. And I'll show you an example in a second that makes it a little bit come to life. But the basic idea is here that you want to always make sure that you're exchanging value with every stakeholder. So if you have somebody that's only giving in your ecosystem, they're probably going to leave. So you want to make sure that they're also getting something back from you. So I'll show you an example here, something very simple, this subscription model. We talked about this already a few different times. So if you have a startup and then the consumer is the pink here, the pink little house, what you're offering is a service. So you're giving them a service and they're giving back to you some sort of subscription fee. It can be annual, monthly, there's lots of different ways you can package it. That's the kind of simple, depiction of the subscription model use case. And you can get, a little bit more complex. So another way that subscription services monetize, especially the freemium ones, where they maybe don't offer anything at the base level, they don't receive anything from that. What they do is they get money from advertisers. So they put an advertiser on their platform. Maybe they're getting a lot of traffic because they have a free service that everybody loves. So they're able to monetize that by showing ads. So it looks a little bit complicated, but basically the advertiser kind of comes in. The advertiser also markets something to the consumer by posting an ad on the startup's website. The consumer buys that product, maybe they click on goes to that website, and every click or every sale that goes through, the startup gets a piece of that so the startup is offering the advertiser exposure, and in exchange they receive some sort of a commission payment. The advertiser offers the consumer a product and receives the price of that product, pretty simple. And the startup is still offering its basic service to the consumer. Maybe they're not offering them a payment for that directly, but they get side payments from the advertiser. So I think this is pretty straightforward, but I like the way this tool allows you to really map out all of the different players and make sure that everybody is giving and taking value in an ecosystem. So you're not taking advantage of any piece. Because I think I've seen a lot of startups, fail when they count on, maybe they're trying to do something that relies on a crowdsourcing model, but if people don't feel like they're getting any value after a time, maybe they'll give you a little bit of free insights for some time, but then they'll leave and then they won't come back to the ecosystem. So you always have to make sure, how is every stakeholder going to be rewarded? Okay. Any questions at this time? Okay. I see there's no chats. Okay, if anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in at any point. Okay, so the next piece that I want to talk about is this slide here, which is talking about the relationship between your business model and your business development strategy. So how do you actually convey this message about what you're doing and how do you create sales? This is taken from Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1. It's a really great book if anybody hasn't read it, and it really talks about a lot of these unspoken secrets in the startup world. So I can highly recommend that book. Basically, what he's trying to show here is that, the amount of energy and time that it takes to sell is really, something that can be very underestimated in the Silicon Valley, especially. So people are always talking about, okay, if you build a great product, then it just sells itself. That's kind of a myth. It actually takes a lot of time and effort to really sell your products. Superior sales, if you have a really great sales and distribution system, that can create a monopoly, even with no product differentiation. So it's not always the best product that wins. I think that's totally a myth. It's the one that has the best sales and distribution plan. The opposite is not true. So you may have a great product, but if you have no way to sell it and get the word out about it, you will lose. You will run out of money. So I think it's really critical to kind of understand that point. Another thing about that there's just so much here to unpack. The other thing that's really important to think about is how much you spend on your sales and distribution. We know that this is a very labor-intensive process. If you're not getting a big sale at the end of that, it's not going to justify that process. And one of the things, typical startup metrics that we talk about a lot are these on here, the CAC, that's the customer acquisition cost, And the other one that we talk about a lot is the CTV, the customer lifetime value. And that basically means if the cost of acquiring a customer is higher than what you expect to make from that customer over time, your business will never work because you're just paying a lot of money to get in customers that will never make you back that money. There's been so many examples of startups from the Silicon Valley that have failed because they don't understand this basic concept. One of the most famous ones, I think, is Homegrown. It was a cleaning solution. They were going crazy. They did a great job with their growth strategy. They bought basically a ton of users through their marketing efforts, but then they had a really high churn. People didn't stick around. They assumed that their customer lifetime value, that people would stay in their system for about 6 months. People churned after 1 month. And the way their customer acquisition cost was structured, they needed people to stay for at least 3 months before they could break even. But people were churning and leaving after 1 month. And so they ran out of money because they spent it all in marketing to get this big user base that churned after a month. And then they couldn't make any more, the recurring revenue just tanked. So it's really important when you're thinking of a business model that you need to test how much it costs to get in new customers. And this is a really nice summary of kind of overall the trends. So you either want to be at one end, the first end here is the kind of mass consumer market where your customer acquisition costs are very low. When you rely on things like viral marketing, word of mouth, or basic kind of social media ads, or things that are you spend a little bit to get a huge return. And maybe your margin isn't so high on those products, but that's okay because you're not spending so much on your sales and marketing. So this is the kind of mass market consumer sales. At the other end of the spectrum here, what you have is the kind of B2B, very labor intensive, very specialized, complex sales, where you have a huge sales team, and maybe it takes you 6 months to a year or even longer sales cycle where you need to be financing your people and your team for all that time until you get finally a huge sale at the end of it. And here your customers are not everyday mass market users. It's maybe, huge multinationals, governments, big corporations, big organizations that have big budgets. And that works because, the ratio, so the amount of money that you're spending on your sales process is worth it because you get a huge sale at the end that justifies it and covers all that time you spend. So you want to be at either end of the market. A lot of startups die in the middle, which is what Peter Thiel calls the dead zone, which is basically you're marketing something, maybe you're creating a ton of value, but if you have to do individual sales, the typical use case here is for small business. There's a reason that small businesses, SMEs, don't have a lot of great products that are serving them. It's because it's really hard to deliver those products without going bankrupt in the meantime. It's hard to get, you have to either have it super streamlined so that it's not very customizable, but you have kind of a mass, you either treat them like the mass market or you treat them like, individual, big corporate sales, but then you end up spending too much time with them for each individual sales rep. So this is where it's really tricky, and it's a really nuanced, topic here, but I think it's really important to think about from the beginning, how much, is your product, is what you're doing going to be marketable to lots of people for a good price? Are the keywords super competitive? I mean, that's also a thing that can really kill a business, which you don't really think about, necessarily in the day one. So yeah, I think Peter Thiel also says poor sales rather than bad products is actually the most common cause of failure. So I think it's really important to be thinking about how you're going to do sales, how you're going to communicate the value that you've created with your product, and how are you going to distribute that. Google is a really famous example of making distribution actually a part of their product. That's a really great way to kind of ensure that you have, traction. So Google, is not just a search engine. I think we all know that. This is where they got, they get a lot of their traffic, but their biggest products are AdSense and AdWords. And one is basically a distribution platform for the other. So they help small, medium businesses market themselves through ads. And yeah, so these really go hand in hand. That's kind of the distribution for their products. It's all kind of embedded and networked and working together. So yeah, Peter Thiel's book, there's a lot of really great insights there, but I think this, this chart really sums up a lot. It's kind of the typical tactics that you would use for either end of the sales spectrum, and kind of a common pitfall to avoid. Don't go after, a small business segment that maybe doesn't have a ton of cash. You're not gonna be able to sell them huge, expensive things, but you need to give them a lot of the attention that, a pretty expensive sales team requires. So, that could be a really typical trap. So either go for kind of the mass market, viral marketing angle, or, if you're going to, spend a lot of time and develop a big sales team, you got to make sure that you're going for a market that has the cash that can afford the services that you're offering to justify that. Okay. Okay, and then the last topic that I have for today is, okay, we talked a little bit about business models. We're talking about business development. So how do you actually package and distribute those models that you're selling? I think the most, this is kind of, we're going from bigger to smaller. So how do we do that? You need to really understand your customers. So you can have tons of ideas. I think people tend to be really creative and come up with a lot of great things behind closed doors. But Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, famously said, no business plan survives the first contact with customers. And I think this is so true. The best way to really test your assumptions and your insights is to actually get out of the building, get out there and talk to people. And this is a process that's called customer development. So I think really you have no business development without customer development. And the best way to develop your customer base is by talking to them. So I'm going to spend the last part of my lecture going through how to talk to your customers and actually learn things, because it seems really simple, but there's a lot of ways that you can screw up and give yourself false positives and build a business around things that have not actually been validated. Okay, so what is customer development? This is basically finding your early customers and confirming their intent to buy before you go out there and build everything. And somehow you have to do this without biasing them and telling them what you're going to do, because then everyone's going to just be nice to you and say that it's a great idea. So this is the best way to learn if your business will work, but it's very hard to do it right, and it's very easy to mess up and get excited. If we do it wrong, we get bad data that tells us that we're going to be right. And these false positives, which I'll talk about a little bit more, can be very expensive and heartbreaking. Paul Graham, I really like him, so I quote him a lot. He says, until you've launched, the only things you should be doing are writing code and talking to customers. Obviously, he runs an accelerator, for software as a service. It's a kind of, software startups, basically. So developers, writing code and talking to your startups, talking to customers, sorry. Okay, there are two stages of learning. So I think you should be talking to your customers no matter where you are. So even if from the very beginning, but even once you have, 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, you should always, make time in your routine to, talk to 5 customers. It keeps you close to the product, keeps you close to developing something of value for the people that you're trying to serve. The two stages, though, are learn and confirm. So, whether you're in the discovery phase or the validation phase. So Steve Blank, author of the many books in the startup world, he calls it discovery and validation. Rob Fitzpatrick, who wrote the book about, which I'm going to tell you about in a second, talks about it as learn and confirm. So when you have your first assumptions and you're trying to really just kind of map out a space and kind of test some ideas, you're wanting to learn. You want to discover what's going on. After you feel like, okay, I have some assumptions that I feel like are pretty validated, I'm pretty confident about this, I just want to confirm those. I want to test those and double check that I'm validated before I actually go in and build something. So kind of two stages. When you're in the learning, the first stage, what you want to focus on is getting facts, not opinions. So you don't want people to say if they think it's a good or a bad idea. You want to understand what they've actually done in their lives when they've encountered this problem in the past. Talking about specifics about their life and not about your idea. And don't ask people to make guesses about the future. So the typical pitfall that people do is they ask for people's opinion. What you should be doing is asking for facts. So how do people solve this problem in the past? In the confirm, in the second phase, what you want to ask for are commitments, not opinions. So I think a lot of times when people think about talking to their customers, what they think about is asking their opinion. that's great, but people are just going to be nice to you. So you want to get away from opinions, go for facts in the learning phase, and go for commitments in the confirm phase. Obviously, you know, the best is if you actually have a way to take somebody's money and say, okay, yeah, I'm selling this product. Would you buy it? And then if they say yes, then, you know, give them a credit card swiper, or, you know, have a way to actually take their money. Otherwise, it means nothing if they're not actually going to go through it. Money is not the only way to get commitments. So you can also get people to spend more time with you, or put their reputation on the line. So if you have a B2B product that maybe has a longer sales cycle, like we talked about, you're not going to be able to sell it, you know, the whole thing. You know, if you're selling a $100,000, you know, package, you know, you have to sell that in stages. So, you know, a next step could be, okay, you know, I'd like to onboard some other team members, you know, could you set me up with them? You know, I want to spend some time with your team next week. If they say yes, that's actually a great commitment, because they're giving you their team's time, which is basically money, right? So people's time is kind of like money. So if people are going to spend more time with you, it's kind of a good indicator that they believe in what you're doing and might eventually pay for it, or they're supporting you at least in this way. Reputation, again, yeah, if you ask them if maybe they're not a great fit, but they recommend you to somebody else, that also is a great indicator that they believe in what you're doing, because they're willing to do something for you, put their reputation at stake. Okay, how do you do customer interviews? So we talked about kind of the goals, what we're trying to look for. How do we actually do this? So what are the nuts and bolts of this process? So basically 3 steps. So number 1, you have to actually plan what you're going to ask, and it doesn't need to be super formal. So, you know, a good way to do this is just go through anything about your idea and just make a list of all of your assumptions. So every idea that we have, every startup, there's inherently a lot of assumptions. So even from basic things like, okay, you know, I'm going to sell somebody something over the internet. Well, you're assuming that people are willing, you know, people browse the internet, that people are willing to pay for things they see on the internet, you know, blah, blah, blah, blah. Some of those are validated. You know, you can reference other models where people have done this. So those, I would say, are both validated, but there's still assumptions about your idea. And I think it's a good idea to approach everything about your concept as though it's an assumption, because it is. And that way makes it a lot easier for you to be wrong. You want to make it so that it's possible for you to be wrong, and you learn something and you pivot before you actually, you know, go out and invest all of your life savings in that. So plan what you're going to ask by thinking about your assumptions. Form good questions, and these should be fast, so easy, you know, quick to answer. Past, so focusing on past behaviors rather than future projections about what would you do in the future. No, how have you handled this in the past? Specifically, so what did you do in that moment? So, you know, if you ask somebody, how often do you go to the gym? People might say, oh, I go 3 times a week. And then you say, okay, how many times did you go last week? Well, once. Okay, well, why is that? Well, you know, my daughter was sick, or okay, this happened. Or, you know, actually, yeah, you know, how about the week before that? Well, that week I didn't even go at all because I was on vacation. So, you know, people think that they're not trying to lie to you, but once you get into the past and you understand exactly what's happening, you'll find that it's not always consistent with how people think that they really behave. And the questions should pass the mom test. And that means that you should be able to talk. The mom test basically means if you can ask your mom about your idea without her understanding exactly what it's all about. So because your mom obviously is going to support you no matter what. So you should be able to kind of hide what you're doing so that not everybody knows what it's all about, because then, you know, everybody's going to be nice to you. Always assume that people will lie to you to be nice to you. And I think that will help. And then the last phase, take notes and share these with your team. In the beginning, you should do interviews together so that you everybody gets kind of a feel about how to do it, and, you know, you can check how people's reactions are afterwards. And then once you all kind of agree on a baseline and how you want to do this, then everybody should do interviews separately, and then come back and compile your notes and, you know, look for trends and themes in the research. Okay, so we're going to go through now and do a little bit of an exercise. So what are good questions? I mentioned this before. There's three kind of criteria to make something a good question. Talking about their life instead of your idea. So that if you do this well, they should have no idea what you're actually pitching. You should just be focusing on kind of the problem space and how people are solving this. Ask about specifics in the past. And then talk less, listen more. So, you know, it's really easy to get carried away and kind of try to, you know, tell people the right answer. What you should really try to do, though, is be separate from your idea and just listen, get people talking, get people comfortable, because that's when you're going to get really the best insights, when people just kind of they don't even know if it's on topic, but they're just kind of rambling about their life and their ideas. And then you can kind of, you know, dive in and go deeper on any sort of topic that they bring up. Okay, the types of questions that you can have. So softball question. So what you say to get the conversation going, to get people to start talking. It should be casual, you know, not, you know, if you want to ask about, if you're trying to, you know, develop a savings product for somebody, you're not going to say like, how much money do you have in savings? Because, whoa, that can be kind of scary. But, you know, maybe you start with something easier, like, yeah, do you feel like you know, have a good understanding of your finances, or, you know, whatever it is. Softball questions are kind of open-ended. You know, if you have something, you know, about the travel space, you know, do you travel a lot, or do you like to work out? Or these can also be a good way to kind of filter people. So maybe you have, you know, if you have something for travelers and, you know, you meet somebody and they don't actually travel, well, then you know that they're not in your target market. You can just move on and not waste anybody's time. That counts as an interview. So that already gave you some, you know, some data from that person, even though you don't have to go into all of this. Going deep or anchor questions, this is kind of the second category. So if they skipped over something, or if they tried to discount something, or if they said something really generic, this is kind of, you know, getting them to focus, diving deeper into a topic. And then deflection, that's kind of getting people talking again. So if they really go off topic, you know, that's okay. You can kind of say, yeah, okay, that's interesting. But, you know, tell me about, you know, the last time that, you know, you went to the gym, or tell me about this, you know, and kind of getting people back on track. So these are kind of the three types of questions you can kind of have it in your mind. I see somebody is chatting, looks like a phone number for Mustafa, or I'm not sure what's going on there, but let me know if anybody has questions. Just feel free and put it in the chat. Okay, we're gonna do a short exercise now. So I'd love to hear from people. So we're gonna do a test. Who's been listening? So are these good questions? So do you think it's a good idea? Who thinks this is a good question? If you think it's a good question, say good in the chat. If you think it's a bad question, say bad. I wanna see a few chat responses. I can't have the whole window open, so I don't see. Okay, a couple goods, a couple bads. Yeah, most people say bad. And that is correct. Bad. This is an opinion question. You're asking somebody if it's a good or a bad idea. That's not going to get you good data. So that's not a great question. Good. Most people got it. Okay, we're going to do one more here. Would you buy a product which solves this problem? Is this a good question or a bad question? Same thing. Good. Okay, better but not. Who said that? Batuhan Yildirim. That's correct. Any kind of time you say, would you, that's a good red flag. So because that's subjective. That's asking people to predict what they would do in the future. The only time that a would question works is if you actually have a way to call them out on it. So would you buy a product? And if they say yes, then okay, here, you know, give me your money. If you have a way to take their money right then you can believe them, because then they'll do it. But otherwise, they might just be trying to get rid of you. You know, we'll talk about that in a second. So yeah, so this is a really tricky question, but anytime you see would at the beginning of a question, it's not good. And everybody makes this mistake, you know, because you think, okay, how do I find out if somebody would use something? You ask them. That's not true though. People are really bad at predicting their behavior. Even they maybe have the best intention and they really think that they would. It's not strong enough to build a whole business around this. You want to really be sure. And there's other ways that you can do that. Okay, so this is not a good question. Okay, how about this one? How do you currently deal with this problem? What do we think about this question? Is this a good question or a bad question? Okay, good. Yes, this is good because it's past. Maybe not so past, but it's, you know, what are you doing with this now? It's very specific. It's focusing on real behaviors that somebody's actually done. Okay, so this is where you get a ton of learning. How are people actually dealing with this? A lot of times, this is a great question to ask because, you know, maybe you find out that somebody has this really big problem. You know, maybe it's, okay, yeah, one of my big pains is that, you know, I can't organize my contacts. I have so many duplicates in my address book. Okay, well, how are you dealing with that? Well, you know, I just search for somebody and I just try, you know, the first email that I find and, you know, usually I figure it out. Okay, so it doesn't sound like it's actually that big of a pain. So this is kind of a good way to test, like, is somebody, you know, are they actually bothered by this? Are they actually spending money on this already and trying to solve it? Or are they just, you know, happy with their current workaround, you know, whatever they have? It's a good way to kind of test that. Okay, talk me through the last time you had this problem. Is this a good question or a bad question? What do we think? Okay, yep, here we go, good. That's right, this is a good question because this is talking about the last time. So this is a past, specific, yeah, give me 1 second. Okay, that's a good one. So, and then this is the bad, the next question, how much would you pay for this? Spoiler, I think I kind of said the answer here. Is this a good question or a bad question? Yeah, so this is a bad one because again, we're asking how much would you? So this is a would prediction kind of question. And we can't trust people. People have the best intentions, but we shouldn't, just listen to them on that. Okay, and the last practice question, how much money does this problem cost you? Sorry, I clicked it already. This is good because, again, we're trying to validate, how much money are they spending on this? Is this really a big problem that they really feel like, do they know how much money they're spending on already? Because then they're really sensitive to this and they see that it's a big problem and they really, would be interested. That gives you a much better indicator about price than how much would you pay for this? Well, how much are they spending already? And then if you can be less than that, then you know that you probably have a winner here because they're already spending that much money. So if you can get them a way to solve their problem by spending less money, that's really good. Then you know that you're onto something. Okay, so how can things go wrong? So we talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to go into this a little bit more. So what does bad data look like? 2 types. Compliments and fluff. So if you're doing an interview and you start hearing a lot of compliments all of a sudden, that means that you've gone a little bit off track. These can be false positives here. So people say, yeah, sounds great, I love it. Maybe you started pitching your idea a little bit and they just want, to be supportive and they're trying to encourage you and tell you to keep going. That's not really going to help you though in building a business. You want to really know if you're building something that people are gonna want and fund and pay for. Looks great, keep me in the loop. That's a classic kind of deflection. It's a compliment and they're trying to get rid of you. Like, yeah, let me know how it goes. Let me know what's going on later. Come back to me at some point. They just kind of want to get away. Fluff is basically anything generic. So, oh yeah, no, I never, I never use apps like that, or I never read those kind of books, or I never do this. Okay, well, why not? Or are there any exceptions to that? So you can kind of dig a little bit into that. Future promises. So anytime somebody says, I would do something, or, oh, I always, or, whatever. And then hypothetical maybes. So when people are really just kind of fuzzy, like, well, yeah, no, I think, maybe I would go to that restaurant, if somebody asked me, or, whatever. It's really not very secure. So you want to try to deflect. So how do you get back on track? So if somebody says fluffy things, I usually, I always, I never, what you can just do is say, okay, talk me through the last time that happened. So let's come back, let's look at a real example here. So, if anybody ever says these big generalizations, try to get specific and just say, okay, or even why not? Or, have you ever done that? Or, kind of push them a little bit. That's okay too. So how do conversations go wrong? These are the kind of common pitfalls. So if you're too formal, and you make it feel like a job interview or like interrogation, that's not good. And then people are going to kind of clam up and they probably are going to overthink everything that they're telling you. If you expose your ego by really showing, saying like, this is my dream that I've been working on for the past 5 years and I'm so excited to just tell you about it. Is it good? Then of course no one wants to crush you, right? They want to be super nice. And then if you're being too pitchy and you're saying, yeah, and you're just bombarding them, these are all the features that we do, this is what's going on, it's so great, then of course people are gonna just say anything to kind of get rid of you. And there's some cute little pictures from the book that I wanted to show you. So yeah, if you mention your idea at any way, you're basically exposing your ego because nobody wants to be mean to you. So you're basically showing it to them like, oh, look at this. And everybody says, okay, all right, I guess I'll be nice to you. And if you're too pitchy, it's kind of like holding a gun to somebody's head. So you're forcing that false positive. You're saying, don't you love my idea? Isn't it so good? You're really trying to sell them. Nobody's going to buy anything from you. They'll just say whatever you want to get rid of you. Like, yeah, it's a great idea. Go do it. Go build it. Go, go do anything. Just go away from me. Okay, so how do you measure success of a meeting? The worst endings to a meeting If somebody says, sounds great, let me know when it launches, because they're trying to get rid of you, they're giving you a compliment, and they're trying to get rid of you, right? Better, there are a few people I can introduce you to when you're ready. But what does ready mean, and why aren't they introducing you now? So you can kind of, okay, well, what would make you feel ready for me to introduce you? What do I need to actually achieve to get that? So you validate by going for full commitment. So you want to actually have something concrete. This is why a lot of salespeople, they really, the ABC, always be calendaring. So you should always get that next meeting on the calendar. So meetings succeed when you get to the next step, whatever that means. Okay, I want to keep talking to you about this, or let's schedule a demo with your team. There's always kind of a next step that you want to have people be doing. Okay, and let's see, I think, yeah, okay, so that was, let me just check one last thing. Yeah, okay, so you don't need to have a formal meeting or business cards or scripts or even to pay people. So if you're doing this well, it shouldn't feel like an interview, and you can be doing many of these at a time. Obviously, if you're selling something to a really niche target group, maybe you're not just going to encounter them at the store or in the park or whatever. But for a lot of consumer facing ideas, especially, you can be doing interviews constantly and just learning a ton about your different demographic. So yeah. There's a question here I also see in the chat, how do we balance informal and formal behavior, because it can vary from person to person? Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think you have to practice. So what I always suggest is, don't overthink it. You're going to be bad in the beginning. It's really hard to kind of switch your brain and change from when you're trying to learn something. You really want to ask direct questions. It's normal. Like, that's how we all are. But you got to be smart about it and think about, okay, well, how can I learn about somebody's behaviors? And what insights can I gather from the way that they're behaving that can give me some real information about my idea and whether or not it's going to work? So that should be the goal. Try and a lot of people, think about it as try to prove yourself wrong. So if I'm wrong about this, my whole business will fail. And I'd much rather find out now from potential customers before I actually spend a ton of money and time building something only to find out later, right? So you want to try to be testing everything that you can in advance. So I think in terms of the informal and formal, you have to kind of see. Obviously, if you're doing like a B2B product or something that you're going to have to talk to people in their workplace, maybe it makes sense to be a bit more formal. Ask for people's time and schedule it in advance. But I would say err on the side of informality, and it shouldn't feel like you shouldn't have like a 20-question script that you have to get through with everybody. It should just be focusing, kind of let it be a conversational piece. Okay, so that was what I had. Yeah, we had about 4 minutes left, so time for questions now. I put my contact information here. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or shoot me an email. And I'm happy to hear about your ideas and answer any questions that you have now. Okay, a question from Safa. How do you choose the right business model for our business? It depends on a lot of factors. So I think, if you want to tell me a little bit about what your idea is, we can kind of brainstorm that a little bit right now.
You a short overview of what the program is.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Because, yes, last week we described it, but you weren't there. We have selected 10 ideas from Sunum's research portfolio that are likely to be commercialized. Some of them are more early stage, some of them are more mature, but we have identified 10 cases, and we have given these cases to our teams. We have 10 teams here. So, and there are 10 or 11 different lectures. So they will be using these ideas, these product ideas, to apply what they have learned from each lecture every week, and submit a presentation on the Monday following that. So this way they will be utilizing what they have learned from the lectures. And also at the end, we hope to get a very preliminary commercialization potential report. of course, this could further be matured afterwards, but this is a 10-week program where the students will get familiar with the concepts of commercialization and some of the tools, and also have a chance to apply these tools that they have learned on the cases that have been assigned to them. So this is the whole idea of the program. So everybody has a different idea.
Okay, great. So you already have the ideas, and there's 10, and these are all kind of ideas from the university, from research that can be commercialized. Okay, great.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of different, different ways to do it, depending on what the topics are. I think what you want to focus on is how you're creating value for your customers, and then who is going to pay for that value, because it's not always the same. You might be creating value for one part of the ecosystem and it's getting financed by another. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. I think, just look through, typical business model. More often than not, subscription models are really popular these days because it's really simple and it's easy to kind of calculate and work with. You can start with that. Depending on how complex the product is, how many steps there are in the supply chain, you can think about what other players to involve. The important thing is just to make sure whatever you're doing, you're able to sell it at a price that's high enough to justify all the expenses that you have in delivering on that service. And I think people tend to price things way too low, and then they're not able to complete the business. There's another question here. Do you think that the use of survey results in startup pitch market analysis is an effective method? Surveys can be really effective. In my experience, people tend to do them too early. So I don't think you need to do a survey if, I think customer interviews is the best tool for really early stage. I think surveys are good to survey your own customers. So once you have a customer base and you're thinking about, okay, what are the next features that I should build? Then ask your customers and let them vote and let them give input on that. But surveys to understand a market, I have mixed feelings about that, because I think it's just too easy to take away the wrong takeaways from a survey. Like, you really have to be careful about what kind of questions you ask. I see bad questions on surveys all the time, and people say, oh yeah, my market is validated because everybody said that they would use this. It's really not valuable. It's really easy to just say yes in a survey. Okay, another question. Sorry?
Can I ask about the survey thing?
Yeah.
I just want to learn, like, when you just learn things about your customer base as an entrepreneur, you just make interviews with them and talk with them. After that stuff, when you just present your idea to another one, maybe a venture capitalist, maybe a professor or stuff like that, you think it's a good method to use a survey analysis or stuff like that? Because it's hard to put them interview results in a presentation, because it's a 7-page stuff like that. Therefore, I just had one question.
I think that's why, yeah, surveys are easy. You get a lot of data, you get nice graphs. So people love surveys for that reason. I would say surveys maybe can be useful, yeah, for the market piece like you're talking about. But I just think they're dangerous. It's dangerous to count on the results from a survey too much. I think to understand a market, there's market research, do your own desk research. You don't need to do a survey. You can find out, demographic information. You can find out a lot just by Googling things on the internet, and then spend the real, I still think it's a little more work to convert the interview results into an actual, something that's succinct and, that you can communicate, but it's worth that extra time to say, okay, we interviewed, 20 people. These are the big trends that we noticed. We noticed these kind of correlations, and this is why we're thinking about doing, going in this direction. But you're not going to learn everything from interviews either. It just kind of gives you a gut feeling that you're going in the right direction. And then, you do more interviews and you keep asking more things. And if you find that you're not getting any sort of correlations or trends, then usually it means that you haven't refined your target market enough. There's something that's missing, something that you're off about, and you're still trying to focus on too many things. So it's a good kind of litmus test that you're going in the right direction. Okay, another question. How can we define our customers if we have radical innovation which is not available before? Great question. Yeah, it's hard. This is not an easy thing to do. What you do is you make assumptions. So you just have an idea. You use your brains and you think about, okay, I don't know, because this is something that nobody's ever done before, but this is what I think. I think that I'm going to be able to provide value for this kind of a customer group because XYZ. And then you go out and you ask people in that customer group to understand if your assumptions about them are correct. You don't ask them, you know, do you have this problem? You know, what do you do? You can ask them if they have this problem, but you should be a little bit, you know, more sneaky about it kind of, and say, okay, you know, here's, you know, you don't talk about what you're doing. Like, it's really hard. And it's really hard if you don't have a specific example too, but it's kind of like, you know, that famous Henry Ford quote, which maybe he didn't even say at the other end, but if you ask people what they wanted, they wouldn't have said a car, they would have said faster horses, right? So you don't say, hey, I have this new machine that goes really fast, you know, blah, blah, blah. People would say, I don't know, you know, that's weird, I don't know. But he knew that people wanted to be able to get faster, you know, get to places faster and not have something that, you know, needs to be fed hay or, you know, whatever. Like, they want something that's easier to maintain or deal with. So you can understand those things. So what are people unsatisfied about with their current options? You can understand that and, you know, make assumptions about, okay, how do you meet those needs? And then you test it. That's it. I mean, it's really, you know, and be open to being wrong. I think the most common mistake people make is that they fall in love with their idea that they dreamed up, and they don't want to listen to people when they're saying things that contradict some of their assumptions. So just be open to being wrong, and you know, you test it and you try and you do different things, and you know, always open to change. Somebody said mobile phone maybe example. Yeah, I think that's the same thing. I mean, when the first iPhones came out, you know, people didn't always understand that. They didn't think, you know, why do I need to be able to listen to music on my phone? Why do I need to be able to, you know, take pictures on my phone or do all these things on my, you know, that's weird. It's just for calling. Even text messaging, I think, is also something that people thought, well, why do I need to be able to write? You know, my phone is for calling, you know, it's for voice, it's not for texting. And, you know, now look at all the things you can do with it's a supercomputer in your pocket. So yeah, I think it's, you know, and there's always going to be, I didn't talk about this, but there's always kind of the technology adoption curve that you see. So in the beginning, you know, the first users of the iPhone, the early adopters, they were a very different kind of group than the mass market that people that eventually adopted it, right? So your target market will be different in the very beginning, and then you slowly build out and you expand. So people, you know, you tend, for a tech solution, something that's really innovative, you want to find people who are a little bit more tech savvy, who are open to these kind of things. They're a little bit more tolerant of bugs or things that might not work, and they won't just quit and give up and never come back. So, you know, you want to start with kind of a small but dedicated user base and really solve a problem and make a few people fall in love with it. That's the best. And then, you know, rather than getting, you know, something that's pretty basic and a lot of people are okay with, build something really specific for a small group that will love it. And then that's the best place to kind of expand. Okay, any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, I will share the link to my presentation with the organizers of your course. Good luck to you. I don't know if there's going to be a demo day or something at the end where everybody's going to present. I'd love to hear more about the 10 ideas.
Yes, there will be a demo day, and we will keep you in contact, keep you updated. Maybe at a midterm as well. Our lectures are open to all of you. So we have a lecture every day, every week at this time. And you will be receiving the links. If your program allows, we would be happy to see you.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I think the next, the one about the business model canvas will be especially helpful. So this, I've kind of tried to position as a foundation for that one, so that you can be doing the interviews now and testing some of your assumptions, so that when the business model one comes up again in a couple of weeks, you'll be really prepared to actually, you know, put some validated ideas down on the paper. All right. Well, it was great to meet you all. Good luck to everyone. I wish you the best in the course, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with at the end.
Mary,
take care, everybody.
Thank you very much.
All right. Take care.
Really
Have a great day.
appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Arkadaşlar, soruları olanlar varsa kalsınlar gruptan, ekipten. Daha tartışmak istediğiniz şeyler varsa, Mustafa Bey de geldi, mentörlerimiz de burada. Programın içinde olan, takımlara dahil olanlardan sormak istediğiniz bir şeyler varsa kalın.
Aynı şekilde
Diyelim.
TRL'ye bakacak hocam, yani kimse gitmesin eğer
Ha bir de o var tabii, doğru,
Evet.
onu unuttum. Doğru.
kısaca
Baştan
çok fazla
söylemiş
zamanımız
miydim?
almayacak.
Evet. Evet.
Yok hocam, söyleyemedim ama yani dün değinmiştik.
Dün
hani.
konuştuk. Doğru.
Evet.
Doğru. Unuttum ben onu.
Ama soruları varsa, dün katılamayan bazı arkadaşlar mail yazdı akşamları, sizlere de gelmiştir. Eğer dün soramadığınız, katılamadığınız herhangi bir konu varsa burada da sorabilirsiniz arkadaşlar. Herkes buradayken kısaca cevaplamaya da çalışırız.
Ayrıca dün programla ilgili şeyleri dağıttık, değil mi? Hangi beklentilerimiz olacak? Önümüzdeki haftaki ödev, kendi teknolojinizle ilgili, bunu size yollayacağız tekrar bugün mail olarak. Ekim Bey'den bir mail alacaksınız. Kendi teknolojinizle ilgili teknoloji hazırlık düzeyinin hesaplanması, ki bununla ilgili dokümantasyon da var elimizde. Ondan sonra da şimdi anlatacağız da, evet. Ve sizin için bu bahsettiği 12 tane business modelden hangisi daha doğru olabilir? Bunları bir tartışabilir misiniz? Artı güçlü yönleri, zayıf yönleri gibilerden. Bir de yerelde sizin fikrinizle ilgilenebilecek müşteriler var mıdır? Lokalde, ilk etapta, yani bu çevrede. Kimler ilgilenebilir? Hangi sektör grupları ilgilenebilir gibi 3 tane soru soruyoruz. Teknolojinizin teknoloji hazırlık düzeyi, hangi business modeli seçersiniz ve kimler vardır ve yerleşik şirketlerden bu fikirlerle ilgilenebilecek olanlar diye. Şimdi Serdal Bey başlarsa.
Tabii hocam.
Teknoloji hazırlık düzeyi için bir sorgu seti var. Evvela nedir onu anlatacağız. Sonra da nasıl hesaplanır?
Tabii. Bu Betül Hanım, beni host yapabilir misiniz rica etsem?
Host yaparsa her şeyi sana teslim etmiş olur. Belki co-host olabilirsin hocam.
Ya o da olabilir hocam. Artık nasıl uygun görüyorlarsa yani. Evet arkadaşlar, ekranımı görebiliyor musunuz?
Evet hocam. Tam
Tamam.
ekran yapman lazım. Evet.
Yaptım hocam, geldi galiba. Tabii
Evet,
çok evet. Arkadaşlar dün de kısaca değinmiştik ama şimdi tabii hepimizdeki 10 tane teknoloji profili yani sonuçta bir hizmetten ziyade bir teknolojiyi içeriyor. Tabii bizim bilmemiz gereken en önemli şeylerden bir tanesi de bu teknoloji düzeyinin teknoloji hazırlık düzeyi. Şimdi hazırlık düzeyleri aslında 1980'den itibaren dünyada olmasına rağmen Türkiye'de bizim hayatımıza son belki 5-10 yıl içerisinde girmeye başladı. Hele son 5 yıl içerisinde de artık ister bir kamu kaynağına başvurun, ister Avrupa Birliği projesine başvurun. Nereye başvurursanız başvurun, bununla ilgili bir bilgiye erişmemiz gerekiyor. Dolayısıyla fikrimizin, projemizin hazırlık düzeyi nedir diye İngilizce olarak Technology Readiness Level diyoruz. Türkçe'de teknoloji hazırlık seviyesi ya da düzey olarak tanımladığımız bir konu. Niye ihtiyacımız var? Bir kere ortak bir yol oluşturulmasını istiyoruz. Yani sizin üzerinde çalıştığınız teknoloji nerede dediği zaman mesela 1 ile 9 arasında değişiyor. 4 ya da 6 dediğiniz zaman herkes onun hangi seviyede olduğunu çok kolay bir şekilde anlayabilsin diye bu var. İkincisi olarak ticarileşmeye, pazara ne kadar yakın, ne kadar uzak olduğu konusunda bize uluslararası bir bilgi veriyor. Bunun için de NASA'da uygulanmış aslında bu. Daha sonra da her ülke kendine farklı yönlerle adapte etmiş. Asıl bilmemiz gereken konu bu arkadaşlar. Teknolojik hazırlık düzeyi 1'den 9'a kadar değişiyor. Bir, en temel düşündüğünüz, aklınızda olan, hiç uygulamaya geçmediğiniz, laboratuvarda hiç neredeyse uygulamadığınız tamamen bir fikire dayanıyor. Temel ilkeler gözlemlendi ve raporlandı. Yani düşündüm ve bir sonuç elde ettim. Sadece bu. 9 ise artık bu piyasaya çıkan prototipi doğrulanmış, tüm hakları tamam, yani fikri mülkiyet hakları korunmuş, birkaç tane ürün yapılmış, tüketiciden feedback almış, artık pazara çıkmasında hiçbir sorunun neredeyse kalmadığını gösteren bir hazırlık düzeyi olarak geçiyor. Dolayısıyla teknoloji hazırlık düzeyleri bizim projelerde 1 ile 9 arasında değişen farklı sistemler olarak karşımıza çıkıyor. Tabii bunu şöyle de kullanabiliriz. Yatırımcılar burada bize ilk görüşmede soracaklardan bir tanesi teknoloji hazırlık seviyeniz nedir dediğinde Özellikle çoğu yatırımcı 5'in 4'ün altındaki fikirlerle hiç ilgilenmiyor. Daha çok ondan 9'a doğru, yani 5'ten 9'a doğru olan aradaki teknolojilerle ilgileniyor. Neden? Çünkü pazara daha yakın, artık bazı riskler daha da elimine edilmiş, bilinmeyenler daha az. O nedenle buradaki teknolojik seviyesi yatırım için daha uygun olarak düşünülebiliyor. Tabii ki 2-3'te de uzun vadeli yatırım olarak karşımıza çıkıyor. Bizim için burada bilmemiz gereken teknoloji hazırlık seviyesi 1 ile 9 arasındaki ilk temel uygulamalı 1 ile 3 arası yaklaşık temel araştırma uygulama, hani TÜBİTAK 1001 projelerimiz var ya, bunlar genelde bu arada 4-5 biraz daha prototip aşamasından bir önceki aşama, artık laboratuvar ölçeğinde yapılmış bir çalışma. 5-6 arası biraz daha prototip, artık çıkmış bir aşamayı ortaya koyuyor. 7 ve sonrası ise daha çok ticarileşme ürün, pazara çok daha yakın olan bir aşamayı gösteriyor. Bu bilgiler bizim için önemli. Biraz önce de söylediğim gibi, eğer bu programlarla, bu projelerle hocalar, inventorlar ya da sunum daha farklı bir şeye gidecekse, Avrupa Birliği çağrılarına vesaire gidecekse örneğin, bunları bilmek lazım. Özellikle Avrupa Birliği projeler arkadaşlar, hani sadece bir ek bilgi olsun diye söylüyorum. Tamamen teknoloji readiness level'ları hedef olarak da veriyor. Şimdi biz nasıl kullanacağız? Şöyle bir soru gelebilir aklınıza. Acaba her sektördeki teknoloji readiness level aynı şeyi ifade ediyor mu? Evet arkadaşlar. Ama bunun nasıl oluşturulacağına ilişkin soru setleri sektör olarak ayrılmış durumda. Yani yazılımlı, sağlıklı ya da genel mühendislik hizmetleri olarak bunlar ayrılmış durumda. Peki biz bunu nasıl ölçeceğiz? Nasıl hesaplayacağız bunu? Arkadaşlar TÜBİTAK tarafından geliştirilmiş bir uygulama var. Bu uygulamadaki soru setlerini şu anda ekranım görebiliyor musunuz? Excel dosyasına.
Evet. Excel dosyası yok hocam.
Peki Excel dosyası yoksa o zaman tekrar.
Serdal Bey, belki bunu kapatıp yeniden açman lazım.
Evet hocam. Evet hocam. Onu yapacağım şimdi. Stop share yapacağım. Evet, şu anda gözüküyor olması lazım.
Evet.
Tamam. Evet arkadaşlar, biraz önce gönderdim, bu slaytla sizlerle paylaşacağız. O linki tıkladığınızda karşınıza böyle bir Excel dosyası çıkacak ve TÜBİTAK tarafından biraz önce söylediğim gibi hazırlanmış bir dosya. Şimdi altta gördüğünüz gibi burada farklı alanlar var. Genel mühendislik hizmetleri, yazılım sektörü için, sağlık tanıklar için, ilaç tedavi, biyomedikal gibi. Bunlardan hangisi sizin projenize ilgiliyse onun üzerine gitmeniz lazım. Çünkü buradaki sorular arkadaşlar sizin değişebiliyor, sektöre göre değişebiliyor. Şimdi burada neler görüyoruz? Bir kere şurada teknoloji readiness level'ları görüyoruz. TRL seviyelerini 1'den 9'a giden A kolonunda. B kolonunda ise sorular var arkadaşlar, açıklamalar var. İşte bu B kolondaki sorular, beyaz olanlar, mavi olanlara bir işlem yapamıyoruz. Beyaz olan sorulara cevap veriyoruz. Beyaz olan soruları okuduğumuz zaman şu üst tarafta hemen siz de göreceksiniz. Başlanmadı, yeni başlandı, başlandı, az ilerleme kaydedildi. Çalışmaların yaklaşık yarısı tamamlandı. Çalışmaların büyük bir bölümü tamamlandı ya da tamamı tamamlandı. Şu gördüğünüz kısımlara da arkadaşlar x'ler koyarak, bakın şurası hemen değişiyor. Gördüğünüz gibi tamamlanma oranı. Buradaki soruları okuyoruz. Teknoloji readiness 2. Yeni bir teknoloji, ürüne yönelik hipotez ve araştırma fikirleri oluşturuldu mu? Yeni başlandı. Buraya X koyduğumuzda hemen en sağdaki tamamlanma oranı değişiyor. Her soruda bunu cevapladığımızda arkadaşlar, bir şey göstermek için tamamını sadece hızlıca doldurmaya çalışıyorum. Önemli olan her bir soruyu burada ekip arkadaşlarınızla doğru bir şekilde ve mentörünüzle tartışmak, cevabınızı bilmediğiniz, bu sahada verilen cevabını bilmediğiniz soruları da buluşçuyla, hocayla bir araya gelerek, belki ona sorarak cevaplarını en doğru bir şekilde alabilmek. Belki tamamlandıktan sonra da hocalardan da evet doğru mu yaptık diye bilgi alabilirsiniz. Aksi takdirde teknoloji readiness level çok daha yanlış karşınıza çıkabilir. Gördüğünüz gibi buraya X koyduğumda tamamı değişiyor. En sağdaki istatistiklerimiz değişiyor. Şimdi burada eğer herhangi bir şey atlamadıysam arkadaşlar, verdiğim değerlere göre Galiba bir hata oldu ya da bir eksik var. Burada 0 çıktı ama burada bir sayı çıkması lazım. Bir şey yanlış yapmış olabilirim.
Bazı değerler başkalarıyla çelişiyorsa 0 veriyor.
Evet. Şöyle bakayım hocam. Şimdi bir tanesi düzelttim. Evet. Yani doğru. Demek ki bunu okuyarak cevap vermemiz gerekiyor. Ama eğer bunu okuyarak mesela ben birkaç tane yaptım. 3 çıktı, 4 çıktı. Kendi teknolojimizle ilgili bir tanesi 6 çıktı. Önemli olan buradaki sorulara doğru cevap verdiğimizde hemen yukarıda kırmızı ile teknoloji hazırlık seviyesi bir şey göstermesi gerekiyor. Hocam, Hamit hocam bununla ilgili tek bir bilgi verebilir misiniz?
Tabii. İsterseniz şeyi bir açabilirseniz, hani o bir grafik var diye hocam.
Tabii hocam. Hemen açıyorum. Arkadaşlar bu Excel dosyasını da paylaşacağız ama sizinle sonuçta şey olarak aynı noktaya gidiyor. Linkten de indirebilirsiniz. Hocam bunu mu paylaşıyorum?
Evet onu.
Tamam.
Şimdi bu bir yolculuk anlatıyor aslında. Serdal Hoca'nın da dediği gibi aklınızda bir fikir var. Şimdi bu fikri ortalığa dökmeden önce oturup bir ilkelerle uyumluluğunu bir kontrol ediyorsunuz. Ve ondan sonra ortaya somutlaşmış bir fikir çıkıyor. Ama bu fikir pazara çıkmaz. Dolayısıyla bu fikir pazara çıkana kadar bu adımların hepsinden tek tek geçmek zorunda. Burada 3'e 4'e kadar olan kısım aslında lisans öğretiminde, bu bitirme ödevi denilen çalışmalarda kolaylıkla yapılabilecek şeyler. Çünkü danışmanının da yardımıyla böyle bir fikir ortaya çıktıktan sonra, bu doğrulandıktan sonra teknoloji konsepti veya uygulaması da formüle edilebilir. Bunların hepsi teori, dikkat ediyorsanız. Kritik işlev, fonksiyon veya özellik, analitik ve deneysel olarak kanıtlandı. Bir mühendislik probleminin matematiksel olarak ortaya konması esastır. Bir teknoloji probleminin diyelim daha doğrusu. Daha sonra da bu matematiksel sonuçların deneysel yöntemlerle kontrol edilmesi gerekir. Bu da eğer uyumluysa, örneğin enerjinin sakınımı prensibini reddeden bir sonuç çıkmıyorsa ortaya, çıkıyorsa onu da değerlendirebilirsiniz ortaya ama şu anda çıkmıyorsa demek ki doğru yolda gidiyorsunuz demektir. Deneysel olarak da bunu görüyorsanız. Daha sonra dönüp bunu bileşen laboratuvar ortamında doğrulandığı noktasını da yapabilirsiniz. Çünkü siz bugün ister bir elektronik kart yapın, ister bir yeni kimyasal solüsyon çıkarın. Her ne yaparsanız yapın. Bunları laboratuvar ortamında yapmak mümkündür. İşte bunlar doğrulandığında siz sadece ticarileşme potansiyeli olabilecek bir ürün elde etmiş oluyorsunuz veya bir fikir elde etmiş oluyorsunuz. Şimdi bu fikrin bir defa bileşenin simüle edilmiş, benzetilmiş ortamda doğrulanması gerekiyor. Benzetilmiş ortam dediğimiz, eğer siz bir makine parçası yaptıysanız, o makinenin koşullarını sağlayacak bir ortamda, bilgisayar ortamında o parçanızın çalıştığını gösterebilmeniz gerekiyor. Diğer taraftan prototip, yine laboratuvar ortamında da bir prototip hazırlayabilirsiniz. Onu da kullanabilirsiniz. Ama bunların hepsi, dikkat ederseniz, mikro ölçekte şeyler. Biz satışa gitmiyoruz, makro ölçeğe gitmiyoruz henüz. Ondan sonra laboratuvar ortamında tanımlamada doğrulandıktan sonra bu sefer tüm sistem prototipini operasyonel ortamda doğrulamanız gerekiyor. Yani bir tane yaptınız, götürdünüz bunu bir makineye taktınız, orada çalıştı. Tamam, bu da güzel. Sistem tamamlandı. Performans değerlendirmesi test ve gösterimle yapıldı. Şimdi siz diyorsunuz ki bu parça motorun daha verimli çalışmasını sağlayacaktır. Veya bu yakıt onun daha verimli çalışmasını sağlayacaktır. Bunları, bu performans değerlendirmelerini de test yoluyla gösterdiniz, kanıtladınız. Peki şimdi ondan sonra artık sistemin gerçek operasyonlarda kullanılarak doğrulanması gerekiyor. Şimdi bunları yaparken hepsi size bir teknoloji hazırlık seviyesi olarak geliyor karşınıza ve Serdal Hoca'nın biraz önce gösterdiği Excel tablodaki sorular bunların her birine tek tek işaret ediyor. Aslında Serdal Hoca farkında olmadan ilk başta başlandı ama az mesafe kaydedildi dedi. Ondan sonra tabii bunların yapılmış olduğunu yazarsanız sistem reddediyor. Halbuki 1'e 3'e falan en sonları işaretlemiş olsaydık, altta biraz daha az iş yapmış olsaydık o zaman 3, 4, 5 gibi bir sayı çıkabilecekti. İş aslında bununla da bitmiyor. Çünkü bu sefer siz tamam doğrulamasını yaptınız. Peki neyi satacaksınız? Üreteceğiniz bu ürünü satacaksınız. Ama bu ürünü üretebilmek için neye ihtiyacınız var? Onu da belirlemeniz gerekiyor. Ve eğer ki bir potansiyel müşteriyle görüşecekseniz siz hangi noktada olduğunuzu söyleyebilmelisiniz ki o kişi de bundan sonraki adımlarda neler yapabileceğini anlayabilmeli. Aslında sizin bulunduğunuz noktadan öteye gidiş yolunu da sizlerin buluşçu hocalarla beraber bir tahminde bulunacak çalışmayı da yapmanızda yarar olur. Herhalde daha fazla bir şey söylememe gerek yok hocam bu aşamada.
Teşekkür ederim hocam.
Ben küçük bir şey eklemek istiyorum. Bütün size atanan vakalarla, case'lerle alakalı şeylerimiz çoğu için var doldurulmuş. Ama evvela sizin bir doldurmanızı, ondan sonra buluşçularla bunu bir irdelemenizi rica ediyoruz. Yani evvela siz kendi algınıza göre bir doldurun, soruları iyice bir okuyun. Bunu yaptıktan sonra da hocalarımızla bunu tekrar konuşarak belki doğru noktaya getirebiliriz. O kadar basit bir sorgu seti değil ama kendinizi bu konuda aşina kılmanız önemli, bilgilendirmeniz önemli diye düşünüyoruz. Onu söylemek istemiştim.
Evet arkadaşlar, başka bununla ilgili sorusu olan var mı ya da yani genel olarak programla ilgili sormak istediğiniz?
Şikayetiniz var mı onu soralım. Genellikle o zaman konuşuyor herkes.
Hocam kayda geçecek mi şikayetler? Yani sonra karşımıza
Geçsin, evet.
geri dön.
Yok geçsin, hiç sakıncası yok. Alışırız şikayet dinlemeye.
Arkadaşlar teknolojiniz çok zor. Hani biz anlayamıyoruz. Bunun için nasıl çıkabileceğiz diye bir şey var mı? Bir endişe.
Tamam. Her şey günlük
Ben
günlük
teknoloji konusunda bir şey söyleyebilir miyim hocam kapatmadan? Hiçbirimiz karşınıza konulmuş olan teknolojileri buluşçu gibi bilmemiz mümkün değil. Yani varsayalım ki biz oturduk o konuda merak saldık ve çalıştık. Ama düşünün ki o buluşun ortaya çıkışı için belki de o hocamız 3 sene 5 sene çalışmıştır. Şimdi bizim işimiz o değil. Biz ortaya çıkmış olan o fikri alıp nasıl satarız? İş bu. Hocam teşekkür ediyorum fırsat verdiğiniz için.
Estağfurullah. Teşekkür ediyoruz katkılarınız için. Hepinize.
Perşembe günü ya da mentorluk
Perşembe günü görüşmek üzere. Mentörlük seanslarında görüşmek üzere.
İyi akşamlar.
İyi akşamlar. Teşekkürler.
İyi akşamlar.
İyi akşamlar hocam.